Recording? Okay, great. Well, again, thank you everyone for being here and good evening. It's so good to see you. And welcome to our last training of this year as part of our activist training program, which is on understanding New Jersey local school boards. We are really excited to have you here. My name is Asada Mann, pronouns she, her, they, them, and I'm a senior organizer with the League of Women Voters. I'm going to let my colleague Melissa introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Melissa Marks. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a senior organizer with the League.
Thank you. I'm sure y'all all probably know us by now. We're all good friends here. Um, all right. So, but for those of you who might not know us, we always want to just share a little information about the League of Women Voters in New Jersey. We are a 100-year plus old organization that's proud to be nonpartisan. That means we neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, and we do that through encouraging informed and active participation in government. We also work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and also influence public policy through education and advocacy. Before we get started, we do want to just take a moment to thank some of our partners of the activist training program, Advocates for Children of New Jersey Black Empowerment Coalition, and Water Spirit. Definitely, just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your partnership over the last few months. This is, of course, the last training of the semester, like I said. So, want to let folks know that we'll be releasing the new schedule probably sometime in early to mid-January. So keep an eye on that. But we'll also be looking to expand and have additional partners. So hopefully you'll all join us again. But please let us know if you know anybody else who may be interested as well. Few housekeeping items before we get into the actual training. As you can see, this is being recorded, and we will send a follow-up email to everyone with the recording, with a copy of the slides, as well as links to a few other resources that we'll share with you. We do ask, as always, if you're not speaking, please keep yourself on mute. You can use the chat box, though, to ask questions or share any thoughts throughout the call, and we'll do our best to try to address them when we have a moment. If not, we'll get to them during the Q&A. And when you do come off of mute, please just be sure to identify yourself so we know who's here, share your name, pronouns, and your league or your organization that you're with. A few community agreements that we like to kick these calls off with. And these are just really expectations for how we, engage with each other while we're in this space so that everybody, feels included in this space and feels safe to learn and get all of what we're hoping to provide out of this. Number one, we ask that you bring your full self and limit distractions. Number two, what is learned here leaves here. So, if there's anything that you find particularly interesting or helpful, you're definitely welcome to share that with other people who could benefit. And the final thing is, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Melissa and I are going to be sharing this presentation with you all tonight, but we are by no means experts, far from it. So, we always welcome the opportunity to learn from others. If you have anything to add to what we say or any corrections, we're totally open to that. This is definitely a safe space to do that. Okay, so here's an overview of our agenda for tonight. We're going to start off with a grounding, discussing why we're giving this training, and our goals for this, and what we hope you take from it going forward. Then we'll go into a brief overview of New Jersey schools. We'll talk about school board members in a little bit more detail, spend a little bit of time on school funding, and finally we'll wrap up with some suggestions on how you can actually engage with your local school board. Okay, so why are we hosting this training? Of course, we host lots of trainings, but why this one in particular on New Jersey school boards? The number one thing we can say is that the League of Women Voters, we understand that public education is essential to our democracy, right? In addition to just providing basic knowledge, public education also gives everyone, every student, regardless of their socioeconomic background, an opportunity to build skills that will allow them to be, active participants in our society. And so, when every person is given that opportunity, we know that it enables our democracy to really thrive and flourish. And so, we know, or rather, we believe that voters, regardless of whether or not they have children who are actively going to and participating in public schools, they should be concerned with the governance of schools, and concerned with their local school boards, because these folks who are either elected or appointed, which we'll talk about, they play a really critical role in developing policies, and really shaping what education looks like for students in our state. And we know that, especially over the last few years, there's been, kind of a renewed interest. There's been a lot of attention being paid to school boards, especially around things like curriculum and, exactly what the powers of school boards are, what their limitations are. And we know that most voters don't really fully understand what the roles and responsibilities of school board members are in New Jersey. And so we want, our local leagues, but also all of, the folks who are on this call, whether or not you're a league member, to have an understanding of these things, understand school boards when you're engaging with them, especially for local leagues and our voter services work, our candidate forums, and just educating the public about school boards. So this training that we're giving tonight, it's actually with the information that we're presenting is almost entirely pulled from a white paper that our state education committee, LWVNJ's education committee, which is made up of members from across the state, they put together this white paper on local school boards, to, in part help illuminate some of this information that we're going to be talking about tonight. So, just want to thank them for all of their work and their efforts that have gone into this. We could not be doing this training without them. And we also have Rosella Clyde, who is the chair of our education committee, here with us tonight. She's a real expert on pretty much all matters of education in New Jersey. And so she's definitely going to be here to help answer any questions tonight. But we also want to give Rosella a few minutes to just talk about that white paper that her committee put together and their goals. So Rosella, floor is yours.
Just unmute. So Rosella Clyde, and my pronouns are she, her, and they. I am co-chair of the State Education Committee along with Deborah Lee. I also want to acknowledge the fact that one of our committee members, Beth Harris, also on this call. This is the second white paper that the Education Committee has done. The first one was on civic education. Our goal, as Asada said, in doing this white paper was to make it school boards accessible to everybody in the public, because a lot of people don't understand a whole lot about them. And so I will be happy to answer any questions as the presentation goes on. I've looked at everything that Asada and Melissa have put together here, and they've done an excellent job of bringing forward the essential information that was included in the white paper. So we hope it will be useful to everybody. What we're currently working on is a white paper on early childhood education, and hopefully we'll get that ready and out to people next year. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosella, for all of your work, and again for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We're going to get started now with the training. And our first section is an overview of New Jersey schools. So the first question, I really want to start off by answering is, what responsibility does the government have in providing a public education? And in New Jersey, our Constitution requires that the legislature provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of free public schools for the instruction of all children in the state between the ages of 5 and 18 years. And Rosella can probably speak more to this a little bit later, but my understanding is the federal constitution doesn't necessarily require for public education, and so that's more of like a state's and local responsibility. So we just wanted to start off by sharing where that comes from within our governing documents, and that's right in the New Jersey state constitution.
So if I could just interject here 1 second, and that is that LWV US does not have an education committee because they determine that education is the realm of the states. It's one of those powers that was reserved by the states when the Constitution was written.
Right. Thanks, Rosella, for that piece. So the next thing here in terms of an overview of New Jersey schools, we want to let you all know that New Jersey has a total of 2,511 schools that are operated through 697 local education agencies. And these schools collectively serve about 1.36 million students during this past school year, the 2022 to 2023 school year. And so you can see in these amazing charts here how that breaks down, in terms of local education agencies. There are 593 that are, responsible for operating school districts, 85 for charter schools, 3 for Renaissance schools, and 16 non-operating school districts. You can also see how public or school student enrollment breaks down in public schools versus charter schools here at the bottom, as well as the different makeup of what grades the schools serve here. All of these, so, we just mentioned there's 697 local education agencies, and all of these education agencies are accountable to the New Jersey State Department of Education, which is the administrative arm of the New Jersey State Board of Education. And the Board of Education has 13 members. They're all appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the state senate. And these folks, they are technically supposed to be serving 6-year terms. They don't serve with any compensation. We have this organizational chart here, so you can see how things break down, how the Department of Education and the State Board are structured. You can see we have the Commissioner of Education here, who serves as both the secretary and the official agent, the head of Department of Ed for all of those official purposes. And the state board, their responsibility really is to adopt an administrative code, which sets all of the rules that are needed to implement state education law, and that trickles down to the local school boards, which we'll talk about a little bit more. All right, so as we said, these local school boards and local education agencies, they are accountable to the state board. In terms of how these boards come to be, though, at the local level, they can either happen one of two ways. They can either be directly elected by local residents, voters, right? Or they can be appointed by a local governing body. Right now in New Jersey, we have 2 types of schools, right? Or school districts, rather. The type 1 schools or school districts, excuse me, within those districts, that means that the mayor appoints the Board of Ed. So type 1 schools, those school boards come to be through appointment, and there are only 11 schools in New Jersey school districts that are type 1 that are appointed by the mayor. All the rest of the school districts in the state are type 2, which means those board members are directly elected by voters. How a school board is structured, the composition of the school board, it really depends on the configuration of the district. We have consolidated schools, which have board members that, are representatives from each of the different towns that district serves. Then we also have schools that serve just single municipalities, single cities, and those board members can only be elected if, they're residents of that local district. So now we're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about that related to public schools. We're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about the other classification of schools, starting with charter schools. So charter schools, the laws and how they are structured, that definitely varies a lot across the country. Here in New Jersey, though, charter schools, they have their own administrative structures and their own governing bodies. They still, they still are accountable in a lot of ways to the New Jersey State Board of Education, and they have to be authorized by the Board of Ed. Charter schools have to be renewed. Approval of the charter schools, I should say, has to be renewed every 5 years. Charter schools are typically not under the authority of the local school district that they are in, and they'll have boards, school boards that are elected usually only by parents of who have students that are enrolled in those schools, as opposed to all voters, the public of that entire school district. So we're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about the governance and how these schools are operated. We're going to spend more time talking about public schools, but we did want to spend some time here. And one other important thing to know in terms of school funding, education funding, which Melissa will talk more in detail about later. In New Jersey, education funding follows the student. The state uses a formula that's based on the local school districts per pupil cost to determine, what amount of money should be allocated to a charter school that operates in that district. So, to put that in other words, whatever funding a local school district receives, if a student enrolls in a charter school, or whether they enroll in a traditional public school in another district, that funding is going to follow the student for that year.
Thought
Right. So,
just really quickly, it sounds like a technicality, but it charter schools are in fact public schools, because they are funded by state, by taxes.
right.
So
Yeah.
they're not independent, they're not like a private school. They are there, and to some extent, and I think there is some struggle with this now, and I mean the league has been part of the discussion about the level of accountability that the charter schools need to have in terms of their student achievement. But they are public schools, so it's important to recognize that.
Right. Yeah. It's still definitely. Thank you, Beth, for making that point. I should have said traditional public schools as opposed to public schools generally. But yeah, when we go to the school funding section, we'll talk about how schools are funded. But that's right. Charter schools do receive funding from the same sources as these traditional public schools. Okay, so the next type of school we'll talk about is Renaissance schools. So New Jersey legislature enacted a law called the Urban Hope Act in 2012, and that empowered qualified school districts to partner with experienced nonprofit organizations to open Renaissance schools in persistently failing school districts. So these Renaissance schools, they're essentially a hybrid, they're a hybrid charter school. So, like charter schools, they still operate under the authority of the New Jersey Department of Education, specifically under the Office of Charter and Renaissance Schools. Unlike charter schools, one big difference is that with with charter schools, students are typically enrolling through a lottery, whereas with Renaissance schools, they're required to provide enrollment, a seat to every child in that in that neighborhood that the Renaissance school services. So you probably are familiar and have seen some of these schools. One example of a private nonprofit org that runs some of these Renaissance schools is KIP. So I'm sure we've seen them. And they also, in terms of funding, they receive public funding through the same ways as charter schools, as Beth was saying before. All right, so next we have county vocational schools. So New Jersey county vocational schools, they really meld together, integrate academics, the traditional standard academic curriculum with vocational training that's usually focused on some type of career, or career track or cluster. So some examples are engineering, aviation, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and so many other things. And these schools, in terms of how enrollment works, students have to apply for admission, and it's typically only open to students who actually live in that county. It can be competitive, including an application, interviews, and acceptance being based on testing in 8th grade. So in terms of funding and governance, these vocational schools are operated and funded by the county government. The county commissioners act as board members of these county vocational schools, as well as their respective community colleges. And I know, just as an example myself, I actually attended a county vocational school for high school in Passaic County. So that was pretty interesting to see. All right, so next thing we'll talk about and go into a little detail on are school board members, the actual Board of Education. So, what is a school board member? School board members are state officials that are empowered by state law to govern the public schools at the local level. School board members do not receive any pay or benefits for their public service. They are essentially volunteers in these roles. What are the qualifications for being a school board member? Who can be a school board member? Legal requirements in New Jersey include that the candidate must be able to read and write. They have to hold U.S. citizenship and be a resident of that particular school district for at least 1 year. They have to be registered to vote in that district before they file any nominating petitions to get on the ballot. They cannot have any interest in a contract or a claim against the Board of Education already. They also can't hold office as a mayor or as a member of the local municipal governing body, or if let's say we're talking about county school districts, that same rule applies for the county governing board. They cannot be dual office holders, so they can't hold some other elective office, and they can't be disqualified for being convicted of crimes. So in New Jersey, there are some Board of Educations who have student members, and they've actually have had these student members for many years. But it's actually now required that every school district that contains a high school have an appointed high school student member, who acts as a representative to the school board. They do not have the ability to vote on any items, but they do have the ability to at least comment and be a representative of the current students in that way. So we want to talk a little bit about the ethical requirements of school board members. So of course, not like all candidates, but like other candidates in New Jersey who are running for public office, candidates for school board have to, comply and abide by all of the laws, provisions, regulations, all the requirements that are that are enforced by ELEC, which is the New Jersey Election Law Enforcement Commission. You know, they oversee and regulate all campaign finance. So candidates for school board also have to comply with that in terms of reporting how much money they raise and how they spend those funds. Board of Ed members are also required to pledge to a code of ethics that's drafted by the New Jersey Schools Association, and we can make a copy of this available to folks. We'll be sharing the white paper, of course, and this is included in there. So we'll be sharing a number of additional resources for people to look at. Additionally, the New Jersey School Ethics Act requires that new board members complete training during their first term. And, you know, over the years, that requirement in terms of what type of training they have to receive has expanded. So since 2007, the training requirement includes that each board member do training on school district governance, and they have to do that in each of the subsequent 2 years after their first term. The additions that were added to the law, or amendments that were added to the School Ethics Act in 2007 also required that school board members do some sort of advanced training program, you know, within 1 year after their reelection or reappointment. So, you know, just seeing that continuous training. And then 2010, there was another amendment to the act which required board members to complete a one-time training on harassment, intimidation, and bullying in schools. And the goal of that was to create safe and inclusive environments for all students. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about school board elections, which of course the league we're interested in. You know, so I know one thing that we see is, and one thing that we say often is, in New Jersey, we have elections every year, you know, throughout the year. And part of that is related to school boards, because some of them hold their elections in the spring, some of them hold them in November. And so, you know, we know that sometimes can be confusing to understand and track. So we want to let everybody know that, you know, until relatively recently, all elections for Board of Ed in New Jersey were actually held in April on the third Tuesday. And, you know, for those elections that were held in April, they also require that a ballot question, a ballot referendum question, asking voters to approve the board's proposed budget for the upcoming year be, you know, included as part of that election. So any elections happening in April also had this ballot question on the budget. But then beginning in 2012, Type 2 school boards, which are the school boards that are elected, not appointed, and as well as, you know, municipal governing bodies, so like councils or even voters, were able to move these annual April school board elections to November. So again, just to clarify, we initially had all school board elections being held in April, but in 2012, you know, there was the option for certain municipalities, certain school districts to move their elections to November. And for the districts that do choose to move their elections to November, they are no longer required to have this additional ballot question included in terms of passing an operating budget. However, they are required to, you know, limit any increases to their budget to a maximum of a 2% increase per year.
Asada,
So Asada, I know that you're saying 2012, but
I was
the
just
slide
thinking
is
the
correct.
same
It's
thing.
2021.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I think it's also important because, again, with the leagues, one of the things obviously we all know we want to do is to get people out to vote, and that's one of the reasons. One of the real impetuses behind the white paper, and I think it's important to state. And as we go forward with this training, I think to keep in mind that school board elections and school board activities are important whether or not a voter has a child in the schools. Because two things. First of all, as most of you probably know, property values in most towns are based to some extent on the quality of the schools. So it's important for voters to be a participant in that. And the other thing is that it's important for voters to understand, and again, we do allude to it in the white paper, that 60 to 70 cents out of every property tax dollar, for the most part, goes to fund the schools. So whether or not you have a child in school, you're still paying for them through your property tax dollars. And so it's important to make sure that voters understand that they have a vested interest in school boards, whether or not they have children in the schools.
Yeah, thank you, Beth and Rosella, for that correction and for the addition of that information. And we're gonna come back to school board funding, and and the importance of school boards and how folks can engage with them. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but yes, in terms of the elections, just making it clear that school board elections can happen 2 times of the year, and depending on when those districts hold their school board elections, that also dictates how they can increase their budget, or what process they have to go through for getting their budget approved. And so as of 2023, there are only 12 districts in New Jersey that host their elections in April. And I can say that my town, Passaic, is one of those, and it's interesting.
Let me just also point out that even though the election was moved to November, the fact that they're supposed to be nonpartisan has not changed. Although political parties do sometimes adopt candidates, the candidates are not supposed to adopt the political party.
Right. And that brings us to this next slide here, which, talks about the impact of changing the election dates. So, Rosella's already alluding to this. I think there's some concern, there's controversy about, whether having candidates for nonpartisan office potentially be on the same ballot line, because that's something we have here in New Jersey, ties them to partisan candidates. So, before we even get to that, want to pull out some information that the New Jersey School Boards Association has reported on in terms of the impact of these election changes. And that, definitely number one is that we've seen higher voter participation for school boards that have their elections in November. And I think, we can all understand why that might be, right? Pretty straightforward when voters don't have to vote 4 or 5 times a year, right? They just have to think about maybe the one date in November. It's just easier. We see those elections have higher participation, right? November elections as compared to even primary elections. So that's definitely something that we wanted to share. And the other thing, I guess, because as it relates to, November districts that have November school board elections, their budgets can only go up, max 2% every single year because they have the requirement. That's led to, greater budget stability. And overall, we see greater cost savings in general because, in terms of administering elections, because you don't have to have an election for school board in April, a primary in June, and then a general in November. So that's just been some of the impact of moving elections for school board to November. But going back to the concerns, right, that can come out of having these elections in November, again, as I was saying, is whether or not these candidates are by proxy, partisan, right, or at least tied to the partisan candidates that they're on the same ballot with, or so, New Jersey state law and doesn't allow for candidates who are running for Board of Ed to have a political party designation on the ballot, as their slogan. So that is supposed to, I think, in part insulate them from that partisan influence, right? Board of Ed candidates can't have Democrat or Republican under their name or next to their name on the ballot. And they also can't, use groups that bracket together candidates that build a line to run together. They also can't use names that are identified with a party. But there, on the other hand, there is no law, nothing preventing these political parties from still endorsing candidates, right, for school boards, sending out mailers, for example, and doing those other things. So there is that insulation, but we can see in a practical way how that how these candidates might still be associated with partisan groups. So, I don't think we're saying anything in terms of our position on that right now. We're just reporting what the impact has been and some of the concerns around this. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about are the roles and responsibilities of members of the Board of Ed. And so Rosella already mentioned this earlier, but boards of education, they really have a dual role, right? They're really doing two things at the same time. The first thing is that they are responsible for representing the concerns of, citizens, taxpayers, parents, and students. Let's add students in there, to the actual school administrators, right? But on the other hand, they are also responsible for representing the needs of the district, the needs of students back to the community, right? Back to parents, back to voters, taxpayers, residents. We also want to add a little bit more information, just a few examples of what in what in the day-to-day that practically looks like. Some of the other responsibilities of the Board of Education. So, number one, that includes hiring a superintendent, which we'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. And the Board of Ed also, evaluates the performance of that superintendent. They are also responsible for approving appointments, resignations, and retirements of school employees. The hiring or the recommendation of these employees does come from the superintendent, but the board does have to give final approval. They also, set salaries and handle negotiating teacher pay and union contracts. They adopt policies for the school district. They have to approve a curriculum for the district, and of course, adopt a budget, an operating budget, and oversee expenses throughout the year.
Just point out there that by approving a district curriculum, they have no responsibility for creating it. They only have input on complaints that may come up against it.
Right. And I'm sure you'll get additional questions about that and what's in that curriculum, Rosella. So we'll come back to that. But as we mentioned before, the school board, they hire a superintendent. And this is really the only employee of the school district that is really directly hired by the school board. And the superintendent, their job is really to handle day-to-day operations of the school district, right? So they do, of course, they adopt policies, but how those policies are implemented, right, that goes to the school superintendent, the district superintendent, and the employees that they hire. Oops. Sorry about that. So, I think the number one thing that we want to hammer home is, again, the school board sets policies, goals, and objectives for the school district, but, the superintendent is really the chief executive, and they're going to be the ones who are responsible for implementing those policies, goals, and objectives, and making sure that they're achieved. In terms of the district superintendent, again, the board hires them. In terms of their hiring, it's typically through contract for a specified number of years, I think 3 to 5. And the board does have the option of renewing that contract, of course. So yeah, just want to add that information And that's as much as I'm going to talk about tonight. Now I'm going to hand it over to Melissa to talk about school funding.
All right, thank you so much to Asada for that very thorough coverage of school boards so far. We're going to get into a little bit on school funding, and we're not going to go into a crazy amount of detail. Obviously, this is quite complicated and there's a lot of different parts to it. So we're going to give kind of a bird's eye view of funding at the state school level, and we could do, dive deeper in future trainings if that's something that folks are interested in. So, how are schools funded? Funding for public schools comes from local property taxes, aid from the state of New Jersey, and aid from the federal government. Any state and federal aid your school gets is coming from a tax base that is much broader than your local property taxes. For example, payroll tax, sales tax on specific products, fees, and some other types of corporate taxes. However, most New Jersey districts receive little aid from the federal government, so we're not going to go into too much detail on that today. New Jersey sets its state budget annually in the spring, and a large portion of the state budget goes to public school funding. For example, the 2021 state budget allocated 40% of the total $41 billion budget to pre-kindergarten through 12th grade costs. And this funding came mostly from income taxes and other revenue. So let's dive a bit into New Jersey state public school funding. You might wonder, how much New Jersey state aid does my school receive? The amount of state aid you get depends on your municipality's wealth, and there's a complex formula based on student enrollment and other factors that determine where your school district falls. New Jersey School Funding Reform Act was established in 2008, and it governs much of this process. The act is the result of a landmark series of court decisions in the 1980s and 90s known as Abbott v. Burke, when the Education Law Center filed a complaint on behalf of 20 children attending public schools in Camden, East Orange, Irvington, and Jersey City, challenging New Jersey's system of financing public education. The ruling argued that New Jersey's school funding system at the time did discriminate against poor urban districts and favored wealthier suburban ones. So now the SFRA formula assigns a weight or a value to every student in the district based on their various needs. For example, students enrolled in a free or reduced cost lunch program and students considered to have limited English proficiency are considered at risk, and they're given additional weight in this formula. So there are three types of financial aid that the state awards local school districts annually through the state budget. There's equalization aid, categorical aid, and grants earmarked for specific districts or specific purposes. Starting with equalization aid is the difference between adequacy budget and local cost share, which I will explain in a minute, so don't worry. Although in reality, there is a limit on how much the state is able to provide at any given time, no matter what that difference in the calculation may actually be, right? So an adequacy budget is what the state determines is the necessary funding level to provide a thorough and efficient education to every pupil in that district. This is determined based on a baseline of what the state decides it would cost to educate one elementary school student with no external factors taken into account. So this baseline is determined by factors such as teachers' salaries, cost of supplies, inflation, and so on. And once they set that baseline, then those weights that I mentioned earlier factor in to determine what the adequacy budget of a district is. The local cost share is what the state believes the local taxing authority would be able to raise and earmark for the school's district budget. So the state determines how much funding a school needs, how much it will likely have, and then uses that to determine what the state will give to the district. Categorical aid applies to additional aid categories that are separate from the adequacy budget, like categories determined by the School Funding Reform Act in 2008 and anything that, maybe the governor issues to address a specific issue. So that combination of equalization aid and categorical aid is known as the funding formula. Additional grants are distributed at the discretion of the legislature and the governor. And the goal of this formula is to ensure that New Jersey children are receiving a quality education regardless of the income levels of their surrounding neighborhoods. So special education. Some funding for special education is provided by the federal and state government, but it is the local school districts who are mainly responsible for free, appropriate public education. Some of the funding for special education is part of the calculation for the state aid that we just went over. Special education and extraordinary special education are two categorical aids considered in the formula. So some districts may receive additional funding there. For example, districts can receive aid to compensate for students that have excessive special education costs, which they consider anything over $45,000. And it's also included in the adequacy budget calculation for each district. In that formula, it assumes that 14.78% of each district's student population is classified as special education. An additional 1.72 is considered needing speech therapy in that calculation. The Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA, also requires states to provide children with special education services as a condition of receiving any federal funds. The federal government provides 3 special education funding grants under IDEA. The largest is called IDEA Part B, which supports special education programs from K through 12, and 2 smaller grants support preschool programs and programs for infants and families. And school buildings in the US are used for a lot of things, right? Learning, libraries, sports, feeding kids, community meetings, school programs, and they're even used in emergencies. Since each school is different, each school is funded differently. The Education Facilities Construction and Financing Act, EFCFA, provides certain levels of funding for facilities improvements for both special needs and non-special needs districts. So there's funding for construction on buildings for regular operation districts, and funding also for SDA districts or special need districts. Okay, and that's a little bit about funding. Like I said, we can go into deeper. You can ask Rosella questions later, but we also wanted to make sure that we discussed how.
Could I just point out one thing, and that is the funding formula was never fully funded the whole time the Christie administration. And one of the current governor's proposals was that campaign promises was to fully fund the funding formula. So instead of so they created the funding formula, and then based upon the funds that were set aside by the state budget, they only got a portion of that.
Thank you, Rosella. Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, the state only has so much money, and they're only going to give the district so much money. So, yeah, that's a good way to say it. So yeah, we want to talk a little about how to actually.
Real quick, Melissa, there was a thing in the chat or something with a question mark about Abbott v. Burke ? And I would just say, it's very complicated, but the bottom line is that if schools are funded primarily through property taxes, which they have been, in those schools in districts where that are very low income, or where there's not a lot of property owners, where it's rental or public housing or whatever, we're not getting the same funding, and those students were not getting the same level of education, quality of education, and quality of schools as wealthier districts where there was a higher level of property taxes. And a lawsuit was brought before the state Supreme Court, and that is what Abbott v. Burke basically addressed, was how do we make it fairer for those students whose districts don't have the level of property taxes that some of the others do. And a lot of this school funding that Melissa's been referring to is based on some of the issues that arose around Abbott v. Burke, and it's very complicated, so I won't go into it. But that's basically what Abbott v. Burke addressed.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, we'll open up for questions in just 1 minute. We'll just go through quickly how you can start engaging with local school boards. So, first of all is understanding the role of local leagues. Our local leagues play a vital role in educating and empowering voters to participate in school board elections, both as voters and as candidates. So, you might be here from a local league, but you might also just be here as a community member. And so you can engage in all of these things. If you are here with the local league, we definitely encourage you to, think about school boards in all of these things that we do, from voter outreach to vote 4-in-1, candidate forums, moderators, observer corps, testifying. And in all this work that we do have to remind ourselves every time to remain nonpartisan. We can do all of this work, but we cannot at any point, endorse a candidate or oppose a candidate or a political party. So always keep that line in mind. But I'll go through all of these quickly. So voter outreach, the league we're a leader in voter outreach and voter education. It's one of the most important strengths of our league. And when we're doing this work, it's really important not to forget to lift up and include and, prioritize school board elections, especially if you have school board elections in April. You shouldn't, if you're a league in that area, don't just think about June and November, but make sure you're paying attention and you're really organizing in April as well, because your community members probably don't realize either, or many of them don't, at least, right? And all local races, our voters may also be unaware of the importance of voting the bottom of the ballot, where local candidates typically appear. So another piece of your voter education is, hey, look at the whole ballot and make sure you see at the bottom. You make sure you know, and you're casting your vote for the board elections. So you can talk to your neighbors. You can hold your own town halls or other events. You can encourage and empower everyone to vote in every election. Don't just vote in the presidential. Don't just vote for your state legislators. Let's talk about the local elections here in our league and our community. Let's talk about those school board elections. We also have a tool, Vote 4-in-1, that league members are aware of. But if your league isn't already using it, definitely we encourage you to do so, particularly for these local races. Vote 4-in-1 is our online tool where the leagues, local league members, we create races and we say, hey, there's a school board race in Montclair. Hey, there's a school board race in, Passaic, wherever it is. And that way our community members can see what election is coming up, what's going to be on the ballot, who's going to be on the ballot. We also send all of the candidates a questionnaire, nonpartisan questionnaire that the local league can design themselves. And we ask them for their input. And again, this is how we can increase transparency and increase education and information. Folks aren't going to feel comfortable voting for somebody on a school board if they don't know who they are, they've never seen a word out of their mouths, they don't know anything. So making sure that your league has a strong presence on Vote 4-in-1 and is covering these local races and candidates is extremely important. And our community members can help us with this too, because our candidates don't always respond. And so we need you to encourage them, to call them, to ask them to respond to this questionnaire, because you need to know. You're not going to feel comfortable if you don't know what your candidates stand for. So we have tools to help with this. Please, if you're a local league, reach out to me. And if you're a community member, you can reach out to me or your local league ahead of every election. We have candidate forums. Our local leagues host candidate forums that provide a fair, informative, respectful, and inclusive platform for candidates to present their views to the public. Local candidate forums are moderated by trained league moderators from another district to ensure fairness and a lack of bias. So community members are encouraged to attend to help us throw these forums and bring other folks to them. And you can also become a trained moderator yourself if you're interested in doing so. You can send us an email or call our office to request information about getting trained or about having a moderator for your forum. And then Observer Corps is another program that we have. We encourage open, transparent, and accessible government. And starting A local league observer corps program is a really great way to meet this goal. Our observer corps helps to ensure that community members are aware of the decisions that impact their lives, and they promote government transparency and accountability. So the idea behind observer corps is that you start going to meetings, open public meetings like school boards. So you attend a school board meeting, you know what happens at the meeting, you report back to your league, and you report back to your community. This way we know what's happening, we know what issues are being discussed, we know what issues aren't being discussed, and our community can be more educated, more informed, and participate more. We can help you. We have trainings about this, and we can help you start this program. But definitely, if you're just a community member, start going to your board meetings and report back and educate your neighbors. Make sure that people are paying attention, and reach out to us if you want to start a program. And then the last thing you can do, of course, is providing testimony. So members and community members, league members and community members can comment as individuals at Board of Education meetings on topics of concern regarding public schools. Quick note is that if you are a league member, you may not represent yourself as the league unless you have received specific approval from your local league, or your state league, depending on what you're testifying on. So, but you can always just as an individual say, hey, I myself as Melissa have this opinion on at this meeting. And everyone's encouraged to participate. Again, if you start going to these meetings, you will be more informed and feel more comfortable making your voice heard and testifying as a member of the community. We have workshops. Oh, and another thing that Rosella, I think, wanted to make sure folks knew is that folks can also research a particular topic of interest or concern, and with permission from the superintendent and the Board of Education, they can actually present their findings at public meetings. And it's a great way to make sure, again, that you feel like your community is educated and aware of what's going on. So keep that in mind. All right, and that's the content that we have. So we wanted to open it up and give folks the opportunity to ask Rosella or anybody else questions. You can unmute, introduce yourself, ask your question. You can share your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Well, I'm sure folks have questions. Maybe they're just generating. But while we wait, Rosella, is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. First of all, you did an absolutely beautiful job. So thank you both, Asada and Melissa, for for the clarity with which you explained everything. I think that's really, really meaningful. I wanted to just mention something about school board policies, and in particular, a lot of the noise that has taken place over the past couple of months has to do with some individuals who are claiming that parents have that they have more rights than the students do in schools. That they're so it's the parents' rights advocates. And I want to talk for just a minute about School Board Policy 5756, which was a policy that was developed subsequent to legislation passed. Federal legislation was passed in 2006 to protect the rights of trans students. In 2018, the state of New Jersey finally got around to passing their legislation mandating that school boards protect the rights of trans students in their schools. And so policies were written in 2018 and were adopted across most of the state in 2018. And then this past year, along with the demands for banning books, and particularly marginalizing our LGBTQ community students, there's been a whole lot of discussion about that policy of 5756. And a few school districts, I have to say, it's only a very small number of them, probably 11 or 12, have actually rescinded that policy. What that does is it leaves the school personnel in limbo because they don't have the instructions that the policy gave, but they still have to meet the demands of the law, the anti-discrimination law that was passed in 2018. So if anybody has any specific questions about concerning those policies and concerning the movements this fall to try and ban books, that it seems to be that the national movements have had an impact in New Jersey schools too, but it's not the whole way across the state. It's just a few school districts. Oh, and thank you for posting the link to the, when you go to that link for the white paper, you download a PDF. And as I said in the comments, there's a whole glossary section which explains a whole lot of the different terms there. It talks about the School Development Authority also, which is not something that we had in the main body of the paper.
Yeah, we just put the link to that in the chat, and we'll of course email it out to everyone. But yeah, it's really an excellent resource the committee has put together. So please do take a look at it. It's not very long, but it's very thorough and informative. Another question I see here is, we'll come back to other folks, but I see from Lisa in the chat, are the County Board of Education meetings open to the public, and is it worth it for citizens to attend them? Yeah, so these are also open to the public as well, right? I've personally never attended a county board of ed meeting, so Rosella, you might be able to, these are, the commissioners are the board of ed members, but do they do these in separate meetings?
So there are so most of the decision making for and the county districts are basically the vocational schools. And so it's most of the instruction that I've seen. I've never attended a board meeting from a vocational, from a county perspective. There is one county, I believe it's I don't remember which one it is now, but I think it's in the southwestern part of the state that has been, because there's been a whole lot of talk about school consolidation and trying to consolidate schools based on a county basis. But we only have 21 counties in the state of New Jersey, and they cover very, very large geographic areas. And so home rule in New Jersey has been has been the policy since New Jersey was established. And
may I just interject, because I can understand why there may be some confusion. Up until several years ago, we did have, every school district did have its own board and all of that, but there was every county had a county board of education and a county superintendent. That is no longer the case. So the only county school boards, as Rosella said, just only oversee the vocational technical schools, which are under the control of the county and are county-wide. But other than that, no, there is no county school board and county superintendent. That no longer exists. So
well, let me just correct that. County superintendents do exist, but they exist for administrative matters. Yeah. So, for example, there are 21.
Like they used to be in charge, and they used to the local superintendents used to have to defer to them, but that is no longer the case.
I saw that there was another hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna
answer that.
Yeah, it was me. Hi. Quick question. You had mentioned that 11 of the school districts were appointed by the mayor, right? What decides that? Like how, like why those 11? How is that decided? And is it a benefit? And then also, if another district wanted to possibly turn into a district that's appointed by the mayor, like I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
That's historic, and there are so many different forms of government in the state of New Jersey, because we have county governments that have uh, uh, committees, and we have borough governments that have councils, and we have, so the combination of different kinds of government is it's historic. And so when you get to those type 1 school districts, they're sort of a leftover, and they have to do more with the structure of the local government than they do with the Board of Education. And I do think that there's a list of them. If you want to know if if you live in a type 1 or a type 2, I think possibly that that in some of those, as again, I think that they're very small districts, and in many cases there are K-8 school districts that have sending agreements to high schools for their students, and so quite a few of our local school districts, like in these local school districts, do not cover a whole K through 12 education.
Yeah, and then also just to add on to that, like Rosella said, the whole navigating which type of government each municipality has can be really complicated in New Jersey. We just did our last training before this one was on understanding New Jersey local governments, and part of what we talked about was the history and the different laws that have passed over all of the many years that have allowed for those different forms of government to be set up. So we'll share that out. We'll include that as an attachment for folks who registered for this as well. But yeah, it has to do with the structure of government. There's the optional municipal charter law, the Faulkner Act, that allows governments to either choose to have a mayor with X amount of elected members, or a mayor all at large elected council or committee members who then internally select a mayor. So it can be very complicated, and we'll try to put a little bit more information in the follow-up email on that. I don't have a list right now of which 11 municipalities fall under this, but we'll try to get that and include it as well. It might be in the white paper. So another question I saw in the chat from Winifred says that she's really concerned about book banning in New Jersey, and is there anything that is being done to address this issue? And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So thank you for this question. Of course, I think this is related to what Rosella was mentioning before with the movement that we're seeing, especially from folks who are advocating for parents' rights, advocating for lots of restrictive changes to curriculum and book banning. I think folks are doing a lot to fight back on that. One thing I'll mention that the League is looking to do is to support a bill that's pending, that's been introduced in the legislature. This bill is still pending some amendments, but essentially what it would do is prevent public schools as well as public libraries. There's different versions of this bill going around, so we'll see which one gets passed, but it prevents public schools and public libraries from banning certain books based off of ideology, dogma, and in terms of an enforcement mechanism from stopping that from happening, it would withhold certain aid from schools that violate that. So the League, we're looking to support this bill. I know in the Senate it's being championed by Senator Andrew Zwicker, and in the Assembly, I can't remember. It might be JC, but we'll provide some information about that as well. And we're expecting that bill to actually be up for hearing during this lame duck session. And so, again, if that's something that you're passionate about, something you're interested in, we always encourage folks to go down to Trenton and potentially testify in front of the legislature.
And one of the other things that this national movement seems to be is it really seems to be an attack on public schools, and it's part of a much larger movement. I mean, the whole book banning and the trying to limit, you see it in Texas, you see it in Florida, you see it in quite a few other states, and New Jersey is not immune from that. And there are some well-funded national organizations like Moms for Liberty that have been out there advocating for these limitations. It's really a social movement that is trying to project a very, very narrow understanding of what the word gender means. And so it's part of a national conversation that's been going on for decades. It's just become a talking point now, and the American Library Association is really fighting back against the attempts to ban books, because the books that they're trying to ban are books that they're calling pornographic, but pornography is a very nebulous term.
Yeah.
Oh, when I looked up type 1 districts, I just found a listing of them. But the listing I found was from 2018. So I just Googled what are New Jersey type 1 districts. And I saw that many of them are in Atlantic County, as one in Bergen County. So you can go down through you can find your county in that listing if you just Google it, and it'll tell you what school districts are type 1. Oh, thanks, Asada, for the numbers for the Senate and Assembly numbers for the bill. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, and we'll share that out with folks. And I think the league we're going to be putting out an opportunity for people to send an email to their lawmakers asking them to support this
Yeah.
bill. So, we'll share that with folks too, or reach out to us if you're interested.
And I want to say that Asada and Melissa have organized a lobby corps, and the Education Committee has a dedicated lobbyist who's working very, very diligently on these pieces of legislation. So we've sorted through a whole lot, and we've been sharing that information with in our monthly meetings. And Asada, you may want to talk a little bit about the lame duck agenda, just to let people know that there were 2 education bills that were part of that.
Right. Yeah, the other one is referring to codifying the policy, right? The A5, I don't know the policy number,
Yes.
yeah, Rosella, thank you for bringing that up. Like I mentioned, the league, we're advocating for this bill as well as a host of other ones, and I'll just make a shameless plug that tomorrow, actually, the league, as well as partners from probably around 30 organizations at this point, are going to be down at the State House tomorrow hosting a rally and a lobby day. If you're available, please come out. We're gonna start rallying at 10:30 a.m., gathering at 10, and then we're going to have folks who go into the State House to try to talk to lawmakers on what we're calling the People's Lame Duck Agenda. This is a list of bills that all our 30 organizations collectively are unified in supporting. And really, when you take this together, it's a list of, I think, about 16 bills. It prioritizes racial and social justice, and includes bills that would strengthen democracy. So 2 of the education related bills that the league is supporting that are on there, I actually think it's just one, because this isn't on that list, this book banning bill or right to read bill, but we do support it. But the other bill that's on there would codify the rights of trans and non-binary students, to protect them in schools, which, there's a policy on the books that Rosella was talking about before that the State Board of Ed adopted. But I guess that policy, we're looking to have it codified so that, the protections are guaranteed and not really at the whims of any specific administration or board members. Is that right, Rosella?
Yes. The but it is interesting to note that this that there's federal legislation and there's state legislation, anti-discrimination legislation that has been in existence for a couple of decades, and the state legislation in New Jersey is catching up with it. But the anti-discrimination laws protect all protected classes, and gender is a protected class.
Right, and I'm just gonna drop in the link for the rally if folks are in the lobby today. If you're interested and available to attend, we'd love to have you. There's a little bit more information there, and you can also reach out to me for questions. We'll also have plenty of other opportunities, throughout this lame duck, but next year as well, to get involved in, advocating for legislation and policies around education. So if that's something you're interested in, please stay involved or reach out. We'll share some information about it. But if there are no other questions, I think Melissa is gonna wrap us up. Anybody else? Any questions that we can answer?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. When I was trying to find information about the candidates for the local Board of Education in Burlington Township, I couldn't find any information except for one candidate. So when someone puts their name in, do they have to fill out any kind of statement saying what they represent, or, giving you any kind of clue of who they are?
Do you mean when the candidates complete the vote for one questionnaire, or you mean when they get on the ballot to become candidates?
Well, these candidates didn't complete the vote 411 form. So I went on the local Board of Education website. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything in the Burlington County Times. I couldn't find anything. So there's no requirement that they have to make any kind of a statement.
Oh, just like all other candidates for public office, we went through some of the requirements based off law, right? That they have to be a citizen, 18, read and write, but otherwise,
Right.
like all other candidates, they have to get the signatures that they need to be on the ballot.
Mhm.
But they're not required to debate. They're not required to fill out
Right.
questionnaires. Of course, these are things that the league we try to encourage folks to do, but no, there is nothing requiring any candidates for public office to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I see
So
another
there's a
question.
question from Cease.
Yeah, given the disparity of wealth in communities and the fact that the state has not fully funded their share, do we therefore still have the significant unbalance in funding for students in poorer communities?
Well, I
Rosella.
think it's not just the funding for current programs. One of the real problems is the safety condition of many of these old buildings, and so there may be funding that comes up for paying for staff, paying for curriculum materials and things like that. And COVID really brought out the discrepancies across the state in just the ways in which education has been supported. And so you have wealthy school districts that have tremendous educational campuses, and then you have some of the urban school districts where the buildings have leaky roofs and broken pipes, and it's just and the message that communicates to children is that that they don't matter, that they're not important. So you have the school SDA funding authority. It hasn't been fully their budgets have not been fully funded. So they have designated repairs that have to be made. They have designated new schools that have to be built. But if the budget is not fully funded, then that money can't be, as we said earlier, it just can't be distributed. So that's part of the problem.
Part of the issue, which came out during COVID, is something as basic as in a lot of these buildings in some of the less affluent districts that really haven't, their physical situation hasn't been addressed, is buildings that were built in the 19th century or very early 20th century something as simple as their HVAC systems. When the COVID thing came around, the air circulation within the buildings caused much higher communication of the disease than in buildings that had more sophisticated HVAC. So you have issues as basic as that. It hasn't to do with curriculum and all of that. That's funded differently and dealt with differently, but it's the physical. And you're right, the Education Development Authority, I think it's the EDA, they're responsible for building construction, and that's a whole other thing. Nothing in New Jersey is simple.
And there has been a lot of discussion about changing the school funding formula, but I think the biggest problem with that was that they excuse me, turned it off. The biggest problem with the school funding formula is just that it hasn't been fully funded, and that's the funding is a lot more robust under this current administration than it was under the previous one, but it's still not up to par. It's still not 100%. And a lot of and there have been attempts to create designated funding sources that would go towards education, because yes, property taxes cannot fund education in urban areas. They're just not. Too many of the people who own the property there don't live in the area.
But Rosella, do they have in all school districts, you know, the head count per teacher, et cetera, is it equal in all communities, or are there those that are less cared for?
So it's interesting. We have so I'm in Morris County, and the Morristown area, as CECE is, and we did an Educating Young Voters program where we went into 3 different school districts, and so I got a chance to personally see that we were in Parsippany. The class sizes were 15 to 18 students, and when we were in Dover, the class sizes were 20 to 24 students. So it's subtle little things like that which make a difference. So it's not, and that's based upon funding. You have to have enough funds to provide for a smaller student ratio. And in the more affluent school districts, they can have smaller class sizes, which means that students get more individual attention.
Well, there's another piece of it, which is teacher shortage.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
in some of the more affluent, and it does kind of affect, because in some of the more affluent districts, they have an easier time attracting teachers. So, but it's really more a question of a lot of school districts are having a real problem with shortage of teachers. And you know, there's a lot of different things behind that, but it's not just a question of state funding and local funding.
Yeah.
That affects.
Is it preference for the schools by teachers that are keeping teacher, or is it pay differences in these communities?
It just depends, CECE. It's a combination of factors, because each district, as you know, in New Jersey, we don't have county districts, except for we've been over that. But I mean, for the each school district negotiates its own contract with the Education Association. So you have that, but you also have some districts, I mean, some teachers would much rather teach in Chatham than in Newark. So you have issues like that, and it's extremely complex. It is not a simple question of district funding. It's much more complex than that.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you so much for that question, and you know, again, thank you so much, Rosella and Beth as well, for just all of your expertise and you know, insight. We could not have done this without you, but we are coming up on 3 minutes, so we're gonna stop there with the questions. Of course, folks are welcome to send anything to us offline, but Melissa's gonna wrap us up with some closing remarks.
All right, yes, thank you all so much. We've referred to a handful of additional resources that we'll be sending, and we'll send an email That includes, you know, the white paper, our Citizens Guide to Government, studying actions so you can understand our education policy and our issues. Our Citizens Guide to Oprah too, so you can understand more about attending public meetings and that kind of thing. So you'll get this all in a follow-up email to learn more. We'll also include our feedback survey. This is our last training of the semester, last training of 2023. So thank you all for being here for that. And we definitely want your feedback, especially as we start planning for our 2024 training. So please take 2 minutes to fill this out. Let us know what you think. It's in the chat now, and you'll get it in the follow-up email as well. And final thank you to our sponsors, our partners, not sponsors, partners. New Jersey Black Empowerment Coalition, Advocates for Children of New Jersey, and Water Spirit. And thank you from us. Really appreciate you all being here. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and take care. We'll see you next year or hopefully at a rally or upcoming
Yes.
event.
See you all tomorrow, 10 a.m. Trenton.
Good
All right,
night.
good night. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.